Hey, I'm Miles Mosley, and you're watching for BassPlayersOnly.com.
Hi everyone, John Liebman here. You're watching for BassPlayersOnly.com. We're coming to you today on location from the riverfront, downtown Detroit at the Aretha Franklin Amphitheater, Shane Park, with our very, very special guest, Miles Mosley. How are you, Miles?
Good to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you. The honor is mine. I saw you a couple years ago at the Detroit Jazz Festival. Before a Herbie Hancock set, as a matter of fact, and you were, I don't know, the warm-up act or another act. You were definitely your own cohesive unit there,
Yeah.
And you were in charge. And I said, who is that bass player with all the energy? And that was you, Miles Mosley. You've been called the Jimi Hendrix of the upright bass, which is quite a distinction. I want to let the people hear you talk instead of me talk. So you're from L.A.
Yep.
Tell us about your musical upbringing and how you got mixed up in this whole mess in the first place.
Oh, boy. Well, what a mess it is. It's a beautiful mess.
Yes, it is.
Los Angeles, California was a great place to grow up, and I was fortunate enough to grow up with all the guys I'm still playing with now. So Kamasi Washington, Ryan Porter, and Tony Austin, even Terrace Martin, who's playing with Herbie today, and Ronald Bruner and Brandon Coleman and Cameron Graves, and this massive group of musicians kind of all grew up at the same time in Los Angeles under the umbrella of the Clinton era that was really arts forward and made sure that there was a lot of really cool programs in school, and through those school programs is where I learned my instrument and met all my teachers and got to study with John Clayton and Al McKibben and Ray Brown, and so LA was a great place to learn music growing up in the 80s and 90s.
What made you gravitate toward the bass of all instruments?
The upright bass, it was a bit of a silly reason, and when I was 13 I wanted to join a comic book class that they had in my junior high, but nobody else in the school wanted to take drawing classes, so they didn't have enough kids to warrant the teacher's salary. So I had a choice between art history or orchestra, and I didn't want to draw comic books because I like taking tests, so art history was out, and I was like, well, orchestra shouldn't be too taxing. So I went in, and all these kids knew exactly what instrument they wanted to play, and I had no idea, and so I asked the teacher, Miss West, to play them for me, and she was not a violin player, but she tried her best to demonstrate it, and I knew if I brought that home, my mother would kill me. And when you're 13, the difference between a violin and a viola is negligible, so she played that, and that was not it either. And she was a cello player, so she picked up the cello, and I was like, yeah, that's what I want to play.
We're getting there. We're almost there.
Yeah, and I was like, that's me. She's like, cool, so I'll give you this cello, you can take it home. And I took a bus a pretty far distance from where I went to school and went through shady neighborhoods, and I was like, I'm going to get teased, beat up, and the cello's not going to come back to school. So for the betterment of this instrument, maybe it's best that I not take it. And in the corner I saw just the scroll of the bass peeking out of behind a closet. And I was like, what's that? She's like, oh, that's the upright bass. I said, dang, you got to take that home? If you play the upright bass, it stays here. I was like, you have yourself one upright bass player.
Does that mean you never have to practice?
Well, the funny part is I started it because I thought, well, it's a low-impact instrument, and now I have to lug it all around the world. So it's sort of the yin and yang of that is now in full completion. But as soon as I picked it up and played an A, my little body shaking against this massive instrument, I was hooked.
How old did you say you were?
13.
Okay. What about the electric bass? Was that on your radar at all?
Yeah. At that time, I was really into grunge, and so a friend of mine played me the Nirvana record.
I knew you were going to say Nirvana.
Absolutely. And I learned Come As You Are, and I was like, okay, this bass is cool on all these fronts. Now, even though I didn't get to the instrument until I was 13, I grew up in this household where it's Ray Brown thumping on my walls every Sunday morning on that very tall Milt Jackson, Oscar Peterson record, and tons of Marvin Gaye, and even really great all the Laurel Canyons players, and just a household that was very bass driven as far as the music that was cycling around. So I understood the power of it and how important it was. And once I had access to that information and realized that like human beings hear everything from the bottom up. So if the whole orchestra is playing a beautiful C major chord and I'm in a bad mood and I want to play an A, it's an A minor chord and there's nothing anybody can do about it. Nobody can change that.
It's an A minor 7 chord.
Yeah, that's true. So it was like the emotional value of the bass was something that I was really connected to.
John Clayton, I know. Al McKibben was great. I just want to go off on a little tangent. Tell me a little bit about Ray Brown and your experience with him. I did get to see him play one time in New York, the Blue Note, I think, or somewhere. But what was your experience with him? And what did you learn from him that you still apply today?
Well, I was a Ray Brown stalker. He was. I think because I was studied so closely with John Clayton, and he's such a direct. Ray Brown was such a direct mentor to him, and I was in the lineage. Ray was a god, and everything I learned was in service of, the Church of Ray Brown. And I got to, through John, to take a whole bunch of master classes, and anytime he was in town, I was always at wherever he was playing, usually Catalina's, the small Catalina's.
Yeah, been there.
The original one. And you just could sit feet away from literally sitting at the feet of the masters. And I think there's things that I learned that he taught me specifically, and there's things that I learned just from going to the church. And I think the things he spoke of specifically was sort of understanding songs fully and completely, and that it's such a challenge too. He was so good at being able to know how to play anything in any key, in any tempo, anywhere on the bass, and it really was the philosophy of knowing the bass from the nut to the bridge.
So in tune and with such beautiful tone.
Yeah, and everything has a lot of intention behind it. There's not a lot of slop there, and that's a life's work to get anywhere near that.
Did he have you go through his method book?
I did that on a side, I think that he was also an advocate of sort of the fundamentals, and so there's a lot of great books to go through, and like I said, this takes a lifetime, and I think every now and again I wake up and remember that I have all this work to do. And so I go thumbing through and grab a book, and it's like you take it out on the road with you and you start going through the fundamentals, because that's what helps you get your body out of the way, so that when you hear an idea, you're not weighed down by your inaccessibility to it physically. So that was a thing that I think I learned from him just by viewing him, being around him.
Very important. Let's talk about your approach to the bass, because I think it's a little different than some people. It seems to me I read something about why can't the upright bass be as loud as the drums or the rest of the band?
Sure.
And the energy with which you, and I mean this in a nice way, attack the bass.
Yeah, absolutely.
Talk to me a little bit. It sounds like you thought that the bass shouldn't be relegated to some background role, and it should be on par with the rest of the band. What, in that spirit, what is it that I read about you, or your philosophy about the approach to the bass that you implement so one of a kindly?
Well, there's a couple things going on. In one sense, I'm very much so a rhythm section player, and I am connected to the drums, and I translate drum rhythms into harmony, and I feed that forward to the piano player, and that gets fed forward to the front line, be it horns and whatnot. And so that role is important. The hump, the feel, and in those ways, the things I learned from the people I studied with, particularly like Al McKibben, was that even in a ballad, you don't turn the energy down. You still play hard, because soft is is soft is like a philosophy, not a technique. So you can give, like, you want the instrument to produce these rich, full tones that is going to be the bed of this entire song, and everybody else is in the instance of a ballad, everybody else is trying to settle in on top of something, and so but you want that bed to be huge, and it's
a growl.
Yeah, so I don't ever let off. I'm going like full steam the whole time, even though like you have amps and stuff these days. I'll turn the amp down before I play, like physically play softly. So from a rhythm section standpoint, like the way things feel and the rhythms and the hump of the music is paramount.
And what about the other half of your?
When it comes time for my solo,
do I have to stand back? Am I going to get hurt when you?
It's like, well, I've spent all this time, we're blazing through a tune, and the drummer's going wild, and the piano player's banging on it, and the trumpet player's screaming at the top of the mountain, and we're all giving all this energy to your solo. And when your solo's done, everybody jumps up and claps. Woo! You're amazing, even though it's a team effort. But when it comes to the bass player, everyone pulls out their packed lunch and grabs a drink at the bar and just up to you. I don't get any harmony support or anything. Well, so I started to look at that more critically. In the past, it out of respect, because the bass it does have so many low frequencies, people would, out of respect to that person's ideas and that person's expression, carve out the room necessary for them to take their solo and share their ideas. And so that meant that the harmony did get sparse because you didn't want to step on the dude, and it meant that the drummers would go to hat or brushes, and because you had to create such a wide sonic spectrum. But it's 2019. I want everybody playing as hard as I played behind them, and I'll figure out a way to soar over the band. So I started looking at like what do I need to do to make it so that my solo can have the same arc as a tenor solo or a trumpet solo or a guitar solo. And effects wasn't really the first part of that equation. It was I ran into a guy named Jason Burns in Orange County, who makes
luthier.
He makes blast cult basses, and he started making like rockabilly basses, and those guys were blazing, and they're standing next to 810 cabs and just no issues, no feedback, no nothing. So once he solved that problem and sort of handed me my battle axe, I could start chopping down these solos, and all I'm looking for is a fair shake at the intensity that I so admire in all of the players that I study. As a student, I don't just study bass players. I study all kinds of Paco de Lucia, and I study Jimi Hendrix and Clifford Brown, and like I've got heroes that have these cool arcs that I want to do to my solo. And so I started to figure out ways to do that. And so I guess I started the story with the first concept, because intensity and like leaning in and leaning forward into music is a sound that I really appreciate, and I recognize that even when something is delicate and beautiful, it is forged in something that has like grit and oomph behind it. And so that's what I kind of try to do to anytime I step on stage.
I think it's great that you listen to other instruments, not just the bass. But what about the bass players? You got me thinking about Lee Rocker when you mentioned that.
Sure.
And I'm thinking, on the electric bass, maybe somebody like Billy Sheehan, or going back a few generations like Slam Stewart or Scott LaFaro. I'm thinking of innovators that approach the bass differently than they were, expected to. Who were some of your bass-specific heroes? Other than John Clayton and Al McKibben and Ray Brown.
Those are my teachers. But I mean, I've definitely the League of Legends exists firmly in the ether. I think Tony Levin, you can't get past that dude's groove. When he catches a hold to it, it's unshakable. Oscar Pettiford, I mean that
played the cello too.
One of the dudes that really like stood forward and took his solos and sort of played over the band as well. Lucky Scott, the bass player that did every groove for Curtis Mayfield, is like an unsung hero, but when you think of those songs, it's just a bass line. I mean, not just, but it is the bass. Like, the song is the bass line. Otherwise, it's this awesome chord and these very powerful lyrics and the beautiful voice of Curtis Mayfield. But, you know, that's the song. And then you layer on all the cool. Like, you get to have the room for those amazing arrangements because of Lucky Scott. I studied all of Victor Wooten's stuff. I am a huge fan of how John Patitucci has changed his tone through every generation and every sort of decade of his focus. You know, as he's been involved with different artists, he's able to come up with these quintessential tones for upright and electric. He's a monster. So the new guys too, Carlitos de Puerto, he's so. There's no fluff. It's like, man, you mean every note you're playing? Every note is on purpose. Like, that's admirable. He's really good.
Comes by it honestly, given his dad.
Totally. And Ben Williams is a beast.
Oh yeah.
You know, so it's like we're obviously I'm leaving out tons of the greats, LaFaro and Charlie, Mingus and Hayden. It's like there are a lot of great bass players that have come up through the world. I can't remember the dude. I always try to. He was in the Holt trio. Oh. He also played cello. Oh, he's such a dope soloist. I forget his name. You have to forgive me. Somebody texted to me. Whack Whack, I think is the name of the record. I ran across it. I was like, whoa. Yeah. Like, of all the bass players that we know that are on the Mount Rushmore and are in the lexicon, like, there's still like all these heroes that have gone, let alone in the studios scene, the Carol Kays and it's like we are we're so much a part of the bedrock of all of music. I mean, Dragonetti, you can't have any of that Beethoven without Dragonetti over there, like, expanding his mind of what's even possible on the upright bass and making all these crazy like things. There's so much dexterity that we still can't really play him right. It's like, so he was really working against the grain.
Probably had action like
and the bow was like this massive thing.
Just a tangent here. Behind us there, those buildings, that's Canada. If you go a couple of 100 miles to the Royal Ontario Museum in Toronto, you go down in the basement, Dragonetti's bass is there. Yes, I've seen it with my own eyes.
I was just there yesterday.
It'll be there. Well, it's been there 200 years. It'll be there 300 years.
I've got to see it.
Yes, you have.
Is it massive?
It was in a glass case. Did it only have 3 strings? I don't remember, but we're getting off on a tangent. But all the stuff that you do, I mean, it's neat to listen to your experience and your approach, but it's nothing like seeing you and hearing you. Yeah. So tell me something about, I know you've got several recordings and you're working on a new record, right? Tell us about that.
I have one record out now called Uprising, which you get on all the
usual places.
All the usual places. But I'm working on my next record, which I'm really excited for. And that'll be out on Verve in February of next year.
Is that Miles Mosley, or is it the Get Down? What is it? LA Get Down?
The West Coast Get Down.
West
Coast Get Down is the name of the collective, which is all the people I mentioned earlier. And you see us play with Kamasi and Ryan and myself, and it's the same band, it just changes who was in front. So when it says Miles Mosley, it's the West Coast Get Down, except I'm in the front. I usually put the drums to the front and the rhythm section in the front, and then put the horns and stuff in the back.
Wow, that's really different.
Yeah, I mean, you know.
Do they face the audience or do they face the back?
No, we put the horns facing away from the audience.
Except the French horns, if you've got any, then they could turn around.
Exactly. No, I mean, it was funny. We have a lot of different debates about this, but in a lot of ways, the rhythm section in front technically is a better way to do things, because all of the loudest sound, if it's behind all of these sensitive mics where there's horns and singers, those just turn into ambient rhythm section mics. But if you put the rhythm section in the front, then the mics back there for the instruments that are not as quiet, not as loud, can be gained up without hearing just a bunch of crash cymbals and things. So you end up with I think, a better sounding stage. And I would argue maybe even a better looking one, because rhythm section players aren't too shabby to look at.
It's weird, though, when you think of a horn solo, you're supporting the soloist, so it just feels natural to be behind him or her and seeing them in the front of the stage.
Yeah.
But I guess your way is just a matter of getting used to it.
Well, I think the way that, if we're going to talk about it technically, back in the day when you had fewer microphones and the drums are the loudest thing, you want that to be farther away from the microphone so that it can still get picked up. So you don't need that to be in front of it. And then you put the bass is sort of a little, you arrange everything in distance from that mic. But again, it's a different world now. You know, I'm loud. So if you put me behind your mic, it's an ambient bass mic. So it actually, I think, makes it for a cleaner stage sound to have horns and singers and choirs and strings and stuff behind the instruments that are projecting this massive amount of sound forward, so that it's just not bleeding into the mic. It's really just like a recording studio technique at the end of the day.
How about Kamasi? Does he give you a lot of room to stretch out in your role with his band?
I mean, in the West Coast Get Down, we're all brothers. We all grew up together since we were little kids. So everybody's music, in fact, is the collective expression of someone's idea. So when a new song comes into the studio, you can feel that it's been written knowing that I'm going to be playing bass, and knowing that Tony is going to be playing drums and Ronald's going to be playing drums, knowing that you're going to have a Cameron and a Brandon on. So we've all been talking and learning about music together at the same time for our entire lives. So the room is inherently written into the song. It's like this sketch of an idea for a bass player, and then you just start throwing out the records you're talking about, and you go, yeah, do that thing. Like, oh, okay, great, got it. So you want that half walking, half skip, 3/4 thing on.
You remind me of Duke Ellington. He had that advantage because of the stability of his band, so he could write for a specific.
And that's the word. Stability is the word. Is that when you have access to the same people over and over and over and over again, or you can design it. Like I remember Mingus talking about time as cyclical, and that he hires, and when he writes something, he thinks about who plays on front of the beat, who plays behind the beat, who plays directly on top of it, and he tries to create a full circle, and that's the sound. Is that you because everybody sits somewhere in the cylinder of time.
And God help you if you didn't play it the way he wanted it. But that's another tangent we're not going to get into.
I saw really cool. We just did Newport, and in the green rooms they had a bunch of photos, beautiful photos, and one of them was Mingus sitting on a chair with his daughter playing in front of him, and he's such a his career is such a monstrosity, and the sound is so violent and wild, and then to see that, it was like seeing a dragon with its young or something. You're like, wow, I've never seen a dragon with no flames coming out of its mouth before. But there it is, smiling and happy and at peace, and you realize like, wow, this all is like, there is his peace. It's a really cool picture to see.
What else? What about the future? What else that you know of is in store? What can we look forward to hearing and seeing?
Definitely look forward to the next record. That'll be out in February, and then
the title that you mentioned, was that the last one or the new one?
The last record was called Uprising.
So the new one will be called? Do you know yet?
I don't know yet. I have 83 titles for it.
Okay. One of them's got to be pretty good.
One of them's got to be halfway decent. And I'm just cycling through them now, but we start mixing, and we're in a really cool stage of the record. It's always fun I put a lot into them, and I think we all do when we make records, and you get to that point where you realize all that effort, and you're just starting the most crucial part, which is mixing it so that people can hear the vision you've had this whole time. So excited to do that. And then I'll be mounting up a tour with my band, and we'll get out there and definitely go to Toronto and see Dragon Eddie's bass. So that'll be on here. Hopefully come back to Detroit. Detroit's truly, I mean this not just because we're on this, like, it's one of my favorite cities in the U.S. and I think actually maybe in the world. I feel like if aliens came down and they're like, show me what America is, to me it's the people in the city of Detroit. There's so much stick-to-itiveness out here, and everything I see looks like the idea we all kind of had, even its proximity to Canada, and like you can kind of feel a connection that there's one struggle here, and I like that. So it's good to be here.
Anytime. Please come back. It's really nice to hear nice things about your city. I do have one last question for you. You ready for this? What would you be if you weren't a bass player? Something outside of music.
Probably like a typographer or something. I really like fonts and typesets, and I like the way words look. So I would probably do that.
Interesting. I've never gotten that answer before.
It's like fashion for language. It's what words look like, and the way words look make people think about ideas in a specific way. And all of this we see comes from sharing ideas. Nothing comes from solo achievement. It's all sharing ideas. And when you share ideas now and you're using written language, you can make them look a way that makes them feel like something that's unspoken.
You're a deep thinker, and I really admire that, and I mean that seriously.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
Well, it's great
More
catching...
deep thoughts at Instagram, at Miles Mosley. More deep thoughts on Twitter, at Miles Mosley.
All right, check them all out. They're all good. It's so great catching up with you,
man.
getting to know you. And please, like I said, come back to Detroit anytime.
Yeah, stay for the show.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. We are on location at the riverfront in Detroit with our good friend Miles Mosley. I'm John Liebman. You are watching the #1 site for weekly one-on-one exclusive bass player interviews, and now more and more people's favorite site for online bass instruction for bassplayers.only.com. I'm John Liebman. Thanks for watching.